I'll begin again this week with a question. What is your relationship to Jesus? Who is Jesus to you? I just want you to notice for a minute, when I first asked that question, how did you feel? A little nervous, like, oh, nervous, like, what's next? Okay. So this is one of those sermons I'm going to ask you to stay with me the whole time. In your heart and mind. Don't be going anywhere else. Stay right here. I posted on Facebook this week, perhaps some of you saw it, the metamorphosis of Jesus Christ from a humble servant of the abject poor to a symbol that stands for gun rights, prosperity theology, anti-science, limited government that neglects the destitute, and fierce nationalism is truly the strangest transformation in human history. That was by Rainn Wilson. Basically, I think they're saying Jesus is the victim of identity theft. Now, you may believe in limited government. You may believe in gun rights. You may be skeptical of science. But I don't think that has anything to do with Jesus. It's like my friend said, we sang in a song, a Sunday school song, I'm so happy and here's the reason why, Jesus took my burdens all away. And she said, I used to sing that song and think, well, I'm happy, but I have no idea if it's because Jesus took my burdens away. Burdens. I know this was going to be a tough day. I just knew it. Thank you. I appreciate it. All are welcome, right? Even the birds and the burdens. All right. A study was just completed by the Public Religion Research Institute. They surveyed religious groups about their response and thinking about vaccinations. And white evangelicals were the only religious group that didn't reach a majority when asked in a poll if they believe they should get vaccinated because it helps protect everyone and, quote, is a way to live out the religious principle of loving their neighbors. I read that on the day that it came on the news that 700,000 people have died of COVID. And I'm just going to say it. How many of those deaths were unnecessary? So Susan Werner is a singer, a songwriter, a comedian, and rather irreverent, which is why I love her. And she writes a song and sings it in a very twangy Southern way that's hilarious, called Our Father, the new version of the Lord's Prayer. It goes a little bit like this. I won't read it all. Not all of it's appropriate for this setting, but I'll read some of it. Thy kingdom come to every nation, thy will be done in everything we do. Lord, lead us not into temptation, and deliver us from those who think they're you. Lord, give us strength to bring compassion to every corner of the world. And please allow for women in the Catholic priesthood to remind the Pope that he could have been born a girl. Lord, deliver us from politicians who drop your name in every speech as if they're your best friend from high school, as if they practice what they preach. Yeah. Amen. Well, for those of us who identify as progressive Christians, it's tempting to hold up examples of beliefs that we may no longer hold or perhaps never did. It's easy to point out how others manipulate Jesus for their own purposes, most of which, in our view, those of us that are progressive Christians, are antithetical to the teachings of Jesus. It's understandable why many of us might be angry about the conflation of religion and a certain kind of politics that has, again, in many of our views, been overall harmful. And Christianity is often viewed from the outside as homophobic, sexist, racist, exclusionary. And people are leaving the church, and have left the church, at accelerating rates. Anybody with me so far?
Yes. Absolutely.
However, you knew there was going to be a however, didn't you? However, it's probably far easier to talk about what other people believe about Jesus that we don't agree with than what we believe about Jesus. I remember back when I was in New York and hanging out with some seminary people, and the Presbyterians would say of the UCC ministers, which I was not one then. I was a Presbyterian then. The UCC, the United Church of Christ, our denomination, they would say that the UCC stood for Unitarians Considering Christ. Jesus asked Peter in the Gospels. He turns to him, catches him off guard, and says, Peter, all these people are saying things about me, but who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Go ahead and let that question be suspended just for a moment. Who do you say that I am? All of us have deeply ingrained ideas about Jesus, and we inherit these ideas through parents, church, culture, media, language. And as we heard so beautifully read this morning, what we believe matters. And what we believe about Jesus matters. And whatever you think about Jesus or don't think about Jesus, simply by placing yourself broadly within the Christian tradition, you are in relationship with Jesus. Feeling a little nervous again? So this text that Jack read for us this morning, Peter and John have been arrested because the powers that be were threatened by the powers that they were exhibiting. We're still working with the one who was healed at the beautiful gate from 2 weeks ago. 3 chapters in Acts is all about the subsequent events of that. This text, which basically Peter says to the authorities, well, I take it no good deed goes unpunished. We did a good deed. A man has been made whole. And you're threatened by the power that would make that happen. And then that section ends with a verse that makes us very uncomfortable. For there is no other name given among heaven, given among humans, by which you must be saved. How do I not need to read that verse? Because I learned it when I was 5. I'm going to say as clearly as possible. This text, those words, are not about Christian triumphalism. They're not about an exclusionary way. Remember how we talked a couple weeks ago that salvation can be translated just as easily, perhaps more precisely, as wholeness. Peter was saying there is power. There is resurrection power that we have experienced What was broken has been made whole. And there is power in that. The stone that was rejected by the builders, that's not a good stone, became the chief cornerstone, the very essence of the foundation upon which we build. And I want to say to us today, as clearly as possible, that I believe that what many of us rejected because of a certain doctrine tied to the person of Jesus, I believe that same Jesus can be the cornerstone of progressive Christianity. Marcus Borg, the late Marcus Borg, incredible progressive theologian that we've studied here, says it's a helpful distinction to have the pre-Easter Jesus, that figure from the past, that historical first century Jew, to make the distinction between the pre-Easter Jesus and the post-Easter Jesus. How Jesus continues to be experienced by his followers. And so I asked you at the beginning, what is your relationship to Jesus? And who is Jesus to you? And I asked you if you were nervous when I asked you that because I could feel it in the room. There was a discomfort. There's a discomfort, I believe, because of the Jesus I earlier described, the one that gets more press. And you know what? I don't want to be associated with that. And I know that most of you don't either. And so how do we remain committed to this Christian tradition when at the very heart of it we feel discomfort? I don't know. That's the truth. I'm not sure. But I'll take a minute and tell you about the metamorphosis Jesus has had in my own life. And maybe it will speak to you. Maybe you'll find yourself somewhere along the way or in a completely different place. But I want to say, and no matter where you end up, any way that you place yourself in the broader Christian tradition, you are in relationship. I am in relationship to this one called Jesus. I grew up with Jesus as the Son of God, whose sole purpose was to die for my sins and to save me as Savior, Redeemer, Messiah, the only one anointed by God. The only way. I grew up with the emphasis on Paul's interpretation of Jesus from the countless letters he wrote. Believing that the resurrection, the physical bodily resurrection of Christ, proves everything else. I grew up anti-science, limited government, gun rights based on Jesus. I never heard growing up about the peace movement, about the civil rights movement. Jesus was the ruler, the king coming again, the perfect, sinless Son of God. And I was supposed to live like him, be exactly like him. The one who died for my sins because I was such a terribly flawed human being from birth. I've changed a little since those days. I don't believe in original sin. I believe we're born, all of us, a divine image, that spark, original blessing. So if there's no original sin, I don't need anybody to die for me. I see Jesus' death as self-sacrificial love, standing against the powers that would oppress. I see him as a prophet, as a social reformer, as a passionate advocate and doer of justice, of a person, a unique revelation, but not the only revelation of divine love. I see him as somebody who was God intoxicated, who went away to pray and meditate, who wasn't afraid to say the harsh things that needed to be said, but who also treated every single person wherever they were in their life on their journey. I see his unflinching emphasis on love, his most radical teaching, love for God, love for self, love for neighbor, love for outcasts, and yes, even love for enemies. In John's gospel, Jesus says things like, I am the door. I am the vine. I am the light of the world. And John's gospel was a mystical gospel. It wasn't meant to be literal. Jesus wasn't a door. Right? Last I checked. I look at it as Jesus said, I am the door because I am wide open. Come through to a greater way of being, to connect to the source of all living. Come through to a greater way of love. I've modeled for you how to love. That's all I need you to do. I am the light of the world, but so are you. That light lives in you as much as it lives in me. I am the vine, you are the branches, because we are all connected, no matter what. Who is Jesus to you? I invite you to continue to journey to determine that for yourself. For me, the one who lived, modeled for me a way of being in the world, that when I practice that, I am my highest and best self every time. And I'm not going to let somebody else's hijacking of Jesus stop me from living a life of my highest and best self, period. I'll end with this. Jorge and I had a conversation this morning outside his office door. And I think we both got kind of teary. Because we both came out of similar backgrounds. And people in our extended families are still in those backgrounds. And we were talking this morning about how they don't recognize who we are. They don't see who we are. They don't honor what we have devoted our lives to and give up ourselves every day. They would never even see us as ministers. Not really. And don't even get me going on the gay thing, but or the gender thing we were talking about. So it's very emotional for us to talk about this. And I know that there are tendrils that go out through everybody that's listening and that will listen later about your own stories. But don't let anybody hijack who Jesus is to you. End of story. Amen.